Alright, now, Azor. Yes, I call it that. Alpha comes before Omega. Deal with it. Let's get right into it. Enough semantics. First gym leader of Hoenn, Mark III. Yes, Mark III because Emerald was a different version than Sapphire and Ruby. Roxanne. Her team is actually largely the same as it was back in the original games. Geodude is quite decent. Nosepass solidly defensive. They're not exactly pushovers in their own right. They're not bad. Brawly has actually had a very substantial bump up in his team makeover. Machop is pretty strong with that seismic toss, dealing reliable damage no matter what it's hitting, and bulk up on both of his Pokemon is actually very terrifying. And Makuhita having the buffed knockoff is frightening. That's a 65 base power move. Pretty dang good, and of course pretty solid bulk as well. Watson is an electrifying force. Magnemite, pretty strong, and also bulky enough at this point in the game to deal some pretty decent damage. Thunderwave Tech is of course always fantastic, and Volt Switch, pretty good damage itself. Voltorb is not great, but a charge boosted Volt Switch actually will be quite good, and of course because of its high speed, it can Volt Switch quite well. And then there is the mighty Magneton. It is an absolute beast. Fantastic stats across the board, especially for this point in the game. Vicious Volt Switch, he is quite strong. Flannery is not bad, but also Slugma is frail and slow. But if it does get a turn, Overheat will be especially brutal, where it can support with Sunny Day or Light Screen, which is also fantastic. Numel can actually take a hit. It can't take one well, but it still can take one. And the Lava Plume or Earth Power is actually quite strong for this point in the game, especially if one is Sun boosted. And then there is her Torkoal. It doesn't have a White Herb this time, but still, colossally bulky for this point in the game. It can easily set up Curse or Sun, potentially even both, last several turns while pummeling with very strong moves. And Stab Overheat can melt just about anything, and Curse boosted Body Slams, they can crush. No dad jokes this time, Norman is brutal. Slacking, terrifying, Retaliate with Stab is nightmarish. Plus, its colossal stats, considering especially the levels, this thing is a very good fight. It's a very hard Pokemon to go up against because again, those stats. And now with Physical Feint Attack, there is only a single Pokemon that is not damaged neutrally by either normal type moves or this Feint Attack. Mawile. One Pokemon. So everything is getting hitting big neutral damage because again, the stats. It also actually has tech on top of that to skirt the fact that its ability still exists. Sure, Vigoroth is not as bulky as Slacking, but it also doesn't have the hindering ability, and it's still no joke itself. Especially if it gets off the effect of Retaliate, it's brutal. Still, of course, has that coverage tech as well. Spinal Slacking, yes, he has two of them again, is still a monster. Coverage, brutal stab, and this time actually has Chip Away to bypass any stat modifications or things like Reflect, trying to mitigate its damage. He's definitely prepared, especially considering that stat modification or things like Reflect are one of the few ways to actually avoid this thing's massive stat. And this thing ignores those. Not bad. And again, it still has tech for skirting Truant. This physical special split was very kind to him. It's fights like this that I love that no over-leveling rule. Winona is actually now lacking her illegal Altaria for once. Thank Arceus. But Double Team Endeavor Swallow, pretty good. Pelipper with Roost, decent bulk, and Sustain, pretty good. Also great for messing with the weaknesses. Skarmory, stall possibility with its awesome Titanic bulk, not bad. It doesn't exactly have Sustain, but it can still stall very well. Even though her Altaria lacks Dragon Dance, it still has the Cotton Guard buff for its defense, which, considering by this point Rock is pretty much the only thing it's actually going to be weak to, actually pairs up very well with it. And also, still has Roost, so it can still get Sustain on top of boosting and messing with weaknesses. And fight from a better point of strength by boosting itself up, healing, and then being at full health with boosts. Very good. It switched from offense to defense, and actually transitions very well. Titan and Eliza are where things dip a bit. They only have two Pokemon, and by this point, they're being heavily outstatted. But if it can live, set a screen, potentially Hypnosis, Lunatone can do decently well, make the fight a 2-on-1. If Solar can, of course, set Sun, Solar Beam will be quite strong, but they are not great by any means. But they also are not toothless, and that's important to remember. Now over to Wallace, at least his gym battle. And his team is not great, at least seemingly. Yes, Love Disc is bad. There are no redeeming factors. But Whiscash is not horrible, it's not great, but it does at least have decent moves, and Mud Support can support his team quite well by negating one of the weaknesses of Water, Electric, by reducing its power by half. It also has Body Slam, so it can at least do some tech. It's not horrible, but again, not great. Speaking of, or as I say, seeking of being outstatted, seeking. It's not great. It can set up a Rain Dance potentially, and it will hurt with Waterfall if it can do this, but it is still frail. His Milotic, though, is a force. Hydro Pump is very strong, naturally very bulky, Recover and Ice Beam. This thing can actually take on Electric and Grass types, and do not horrible against them. At least, special one, considering that now Grass can be physical. Now on to the rival battles. Second battle for May. Her teams are actually not terrible. Decently strong moves on Pokemon, and Pokemon with having good stats at this point, they aren't terrible. Not a huge threat, but it's also not terrible. Third fight is actually much of the same, though two other members are slightly falling off by this point and starting to be outstatted. They at least have some decent moves. Swallow in the fourth fight is okay, we've already been over Double Team, but outside of Aerial Ace, it really is kinda useless. However, the coverage Pokemon all do have good moves, and being fully evolved, they are quite a force to be reckoned with, especially that Breloom. Wailord is also quite good, and even though Magcargo is not the best, it's no true slouch. The starter, though, their moves actually are not great. They're actually a bit of a downgrade. However, the other Pokemon actually counterbalance this. This is actually a bit of a reversal. Next battle is on Route 103. The teams are back to being good form. Pivot Swallow, not bad. And finally, a Raichu that understands tech over power with Light Screen. Yes, it's fast, it has a decent Thunderbolt, but Paralysis Spreading and Screen Support is beautiful and much more beneficial. Wailord is decked out. Even if it's not the most powerful thing in the world, it is bulky, and Bulldoze for a speed drop is actually quite decent. It also is solidly heavy for Heavy Slam to do. Surf, as always, is a powerful stab, and Ice Beam, great for coverage. Breloom, though, this thing's mean. Brutal attack stat, 2 strong stabs, Effect Spore, so that it can capitalize on physical attackers trying to hit it. It can do extremely well with any of the effects, of course, that activated Paralysis, dropping speed so it can outspeed things, poison damage over time, and Venoshock, and just sleep in general being good. You can capitalize on all those. Though the Magcargo is not terrible, it's okay enough. The starter is where things have gotten even better. They are mega capable now, and they are all highly aggressive. They also have extremely solid moves. Even if they're not super insurmountable Pokemon, they're at least good. They definitely can put up a fight. This is the last one you face against them. Rival Wally is next. Like before, we are skipping the first fight and jumping straight to his second one to the one in Victory Road. And his team is... it's not terrible, but Altaria, it is bulky, but it's not bulky enough. It's got a decent Dragon Pulse, but that's it. Delcatty, not good. Nice Tech and Sing, and Cute Charm might be able to help, but it's not enough. It's not particularly fast. Roselia is just frail, but at least Toxic and Lead Seed are actually nice ideas. Magneton is great. It's strong, bulky enough. It's okay. His Mega Gallade, though, fast, brutally strong, solid bulk for those offenses. This thing is a monster. Very good. Is it able to make up for his whole team? No, but it is exceedingly strong in its own right. We're not going over his Battle Maison teams because, again, Battle Facility teams, which actually are much better, but again, not going over those. Now on to the Magma and Aqua lineups. First battle is actually at Meteor Falls this time. First brush with these is a multi-battle against either Tabitha or Shelly and a grunt of the respective team. Mightyena is not terrible, nor is Numel and Coughing for the Magma one. Both are pretty decent and bulky. For Shelly, Mightyena is the exact same, but Carvanha is decent enough for now, and the Grunt's Grimer is actually pretty good. Not great, but pretty good. Next up is at Mount Chimney, where Tabitha has a pretty decent Coughing. It's bulky, has okay moves, and if it can land a poison, it can be a threat. And Numel is the same with Burn. It's not bad. He does have some strong moves. Jelly for Team Aqua is, of course, the exact same. Grimer with Minimize and Mud Bomb, not bad. It can evade and rack up poison decently well because Grimer is not terrible at this point. And Carvanha is glassy, yes, but Assurance or Aqua Jet will at least do some damage. And Swagger, it actually can potentially stall for a bit. Next, we go to the leaders with Maxi for Team Magma. His Mightyena is actually quite good for this point. Intimidate and Snarl allow to cover both offenses quite well in nerfing them to allow it to survive and actually have its frailty not compromise it too much. Golbat is actually not bad as well. It is fast, has a pretty decent power, and a strong enough wing attack for this point anyway. It also has Confuse Ray. But Camerupt with rock solid rock ability is bulky. More than that, it's strong. High offenses at this point, solid moves, it does not mess around. Flooding in, we got Team Aqua's leader of Archie, and his team is the same at the start. Just swap out for Camera for Sharpedo. Glacia, yes, but it can take a hit for this point in the game because of how offensive stats are, and it has probably the highest attacking stat you'll see at this point in the game for a long time. It's great speed, great attacking power, mean it can deal some solid damage, and even ground types will be afraid of its Ice Fang for this point in the game. And if it can land a Confusion with Swagger, well, an actual turn of this thing being out is lethal. An actual turn of this thing being out is very bad for your health. And even if things outspeed it or use priority moves on it, it can do more damage with Assurance because it has Rough Skin, because almost every single move that is a priority move is a contact move. And most moves early game also are contact based. So it can actually hit pretty hard with Assurance if you're fast enough or use priority. Not bad. The next fight is on Southern Island, where you tag battle with Steven Stone. You face a Grunt with Courtney on Team Magma, with a solidly powered Gamma and okay enough coughing for this point in the game with the Grunt. Team Aqua's case, you're fighting Matt with his Sharpedo. It's not great, but it's still strong, again because of the stats at this point. The Grunt having a pretty good Grimer. Then at the Weather Institute, Tabitha has a Camrept. Again, not terrible, but it is his only Pokemon. Kinda not great. Jelly for Team Aqua has the same thing as Matt Sharpedo. It's kinda bad. Okay, it's really bad. No stabs? Really? Mount Pyre, Courtney again. Camera, but this time it's been curbed. As levels have caught up with it, stats are not as huge, and it's not as great as it was before. Matt, though, Sharpedo is just not good. At least Camera had decent bulk and solid rock as an ability, as well as stabs. Sharpedo, none of that. Can't even really poison stall that well because it's just frail. Next, you're storming the hideout of these evil teams, and of course both Courtney and Matt are suffering the exact same problem. No stab. Granted, this is meant as a diversion, so them not being good is kind of the point. But still, they're a joke. C4 Cavern is next, and Maxie's final battle awaits. His Mighty Enna, though, is weak. Only takedown? Weezing is bulky and has a decent Sludge Bomb, but really, that's all it has other than going boom. And this isn't the same explosion we all know and love and loathe from the earlier generations. This is the one where it loses its defense cutting effect, so it's only a base 250 power move, not a base 500. Repet, though, with acrobatics is actually quite a menace, but Camerupt is not that great. Sure, it has a Mega, but Sheer Force only helps one move in Rock Slide. It's also not a very great physical attacker, so it really can't afford setup. Surging into Archie, his Mighty Enna and Clubba are identical to, of course, Maxie's, but Muck does have some nice tech. If it can land a poison, or even just hit a gunk shot, it can deal some solid damage. The roles are of course reversed now, with Mega Sharpedo packing a vicious crunch, and it actually won't die to a stiff breeze because of its defenses. I still find it funny that almost none of these guys actually have water type moves outside of like Aqua Jet on one fight. Team Aqua still, you fail. But, enough semantics, on the Elite Four. So, Sydney. Intimidate Mighty Enna isn't horrible. Okay, it's bad. It's frail, it's not fast. It at least has Sucker Punch, which is strong-ish, so it can get around its poor speed. It is something, but it's not great. Shiftry is frail, but it has at least some HP. It might be able to soak up a hit, but again, just a hit. Leaf Blade is okay, it's not super strong, but it's also not too weak. It's so-so. Same is true for Cacturn and Sharpedo. Again, not horrible, Sharpedo is at least fast enough, it does have a strong crunch, but that's just about everything it's got. Absol is pretty much of the same. It's a great attacker physically speaking, with super luck boosting its power. It is strong, but it's also worth mentioning that this is when crits were nerfed. They're no longer double damage, they are now, well, this was actually something that Generation 6 did as a whole, but mentioning now for sake of things, this is Ace. Super Luck is not as good as it was before, because now crits are not double damage. They're 50% boosted, not doubled. Kinda undercuts things. Phoebe, her Dusclops, great bulwark. And of course with Confuse Ray and Curse, it can do some great damage without having to use attacking stats. So skirts the fact that it actually is very bulky and has pretty poor offensive stats regardless. Not bad. Shadow Punch, while not very strong, it can at least do some damage as just Chip. Her first Bayonet, it's not great. At a glance, yes, it's frail, but it does not have good moves to match its stats. It does have Will-O-Wisp though, and Spite, which is good tech. It's meant as a tech user, not an attacker. Is it great? No. Is it bad? No. Sableye though is actually quite good for once. Shadow Claw and Power Gem are not exactly the greatest thing in the world, but Foul Play is a fantastic move, and it doesn't need to use its own stats for this. It can use an opposing strong attacker against itself to rebound its power. Her second Bayonet is much like her first. It doesn't have great offensive moves, but has Toxic for some residual rack up over time. Not bad. There's a reason that I made special note of the fact that her Pokemon had status moves, and that's because of her Dusknoir. It has Hex. Inflicts double damage, of course, to status opponents, and if either Bayonet can actually get off its status condition, this actually will be stacking up pretty decent damage. It's not exactly a special attacker, but it is a very powerful move, and it also has very good defenses, so it will do a good amount of damage for its bulk, especially considering there's also the residual rack up going off. It's definitely not bad. She's got a pretty okay team. Next, we have a Glacia. Glalie is not exactly great, but at least it can set up a screen, or even better, set up hail. Her second Glalie has Freeze Dry to really hammer water type seeking to try to resist out the ice type moves. Not bad, something you do see again competitively. Her first Frostlass at least has Snow Cloak and Hail. Not terrible, pretty decent blizzards, plus with high speed. Her second Frostlass is actually much the same as her first, only better in Blizzard. Shadow Ball is not exactly super powerful, but at least it's something. And now her Walrein is, of course, a monster. Bulky. If Hail's up, it's got a good Blizzard. It's not a bad lineup overall. Who says Hail is the worst weather? Well, not Glacia. Fourth up is Drake, and Altaria is not great. But Flygon is not bad. It's definitely quite strong. Kingdra, though, is a menace. Yawn is very good. It's got some pretty great stats across the board, great moves, and a solid thing. Second Flygon is not as good as the first one. It's a special attacker, not as great as its physical attack stats, but Boomburst is actually quite good in terms of base power, so it actually somewhat can compensate. His final Pokemon, Salamence, is a force of destruction. Great stats, Intimidate. This thing can do lots of damage. It's pretty great moves. Sans Thunderfang, again, fantastic. With the Elite Four Feld, move on to Champion Steven Stone, leading the charge with a sturdy Skarmory. This thing will all but ensure the fact he can get a single layer of spikes up or a Toxic. Considering that Skarmory is still a very good Pokemon by this point in the game, it can do even more than that. So there's going to be spikes or status or both. Not a bad leadoff. It's a tough bird. Claydol, second up with dual screens. It's not a damage threat, it's meant to stall things out, of course, with its gigantic defenses, even better screens when applied. It has at least decent moves, it's not terrible. It does this job amazingly. It can definitely win a war of attrition and do it respectably. Especially if those screens are up, his Aggron is free to play. Fantastic physical bulk, great moves, and with sturdy, it can hit pretty hard and really not get hit hard in return. Even though it does, of course, have 4 times weaknesses and a very low special defense, it still has sturdy, so it can still get a hit in. Cradily is a terrifying Stalfit. Bulky, even if it doesn't have a stain outside of Giga Drain, Confuse Ray and poison damage are still pretty solid. Armaldo has the decent offense of the things. Yes, Rock Blast is not the best thing, but it's also far from weak. It's just that it's not the most reliable thing. It's not a bad Pokemon, and it does at least have some pretty good coverage, some pretty solid bulk, but it isn't the greatest thing ever. That honor or dishonor belongs to his Mega Metagross. This thing is bulky, it is fast, it is one of the most aggressive things you will find. This thing is not easy to take down at all, and it is able to outstat even normal legendaries. The only thing surpassing it is the primals. Not even other megas can really compete with this thing because of its stellar type combination and even more fantastic stat distribution. Remember, Mega Metagross has solid everything. 110 speed and bare minimum of 100 for every other stat, other than, of course, HP. Sky high physical attack, boosted by Tough Claw's contact moves, amazing defense, great special defense. There really are no flaws in this thing's armor. I know that we went over before with Diantha that Megas really are not as powerful as the competitive leads to believe them, but that was because the Pokemon they are using were pretty frail and didn't really have much backbone nor a pretty solid defensive typing. Metagross has fantastic stats, a fantastic typing, and brutally powerful moves, boosted by Tough Claws. It can outdamage almost anything that it comes up against because it doesn't take much damage from much else. It doesn't matter if it's not doing the most damage in terms of other megas, it just matters that it's not taking much in return. This thing is a great lineup. He doesn't just go for pure straight out force, he goes for damage over time over a prolonged battle. And especially considering the fact that he has a Spikes setup Skarmory, his team does great at this. That's what makes it really hard. And unlike in Gen 3, you don't have the badge boosts.